On a nice quiet night in the unsuspecting town Laguna Niguel, California, one of the most daring heists of a bank in America's history was underway. The most surprising part of it? This audacious heist was pulled off by a mastermind criminal whose well-laid plans had foiled the best efforts of the FBI. Now, even the perfect crime had a lot to go wrong. What followed was to turn this audacious criminal enterprise into a legendary tale of inside gambling and a relentless chase for justice. How did one man outsmart the FBI? And what criminal mistake led to his fall? This is the incredible story of the man who outsmarted the FBI. It started on the evening of March 24th, 1972. The quiet streets of Laguna Niguel, California were enveloped by the usual soft night sounds of the Pacific Ocean. Beneath this quiet surface, a storm was building, one that would shortly burst into the national consciousness. As the sun set below the horizon, the United California Bank offered its same unimpressive appearance. Its strong rooms gave no indication of the treasure they contained. Within minutes, however, all this was to change dramatically as a gang of men entered the bank with every move planned over the last few months. Leonard T. McNair was the mastermind behind the heist. Additionally, he had hired highly skilled criminals chosen for their proficiency in certain areas of the job. McNair was no common criminal. He was an intelligent and foresighted man and had a name for himself with his meticulous planning. He was a native of Ohio and had developed his craft of burglary over many years. Now, when McNair was 30, he had already become recognized as one of the most efficient and daring burglars in the whole country. For the heist of the United California Bank, he had gathered the best crew imaginable. Right beside him was Emil Dincio, the most infamous burglar of Ohio. Dincio was quite popular for his safe-cracking skills. He was a logistician by trade, virtually managing the mechanics behind this heist with precision. Next to Emil was his brother, James Dincio, a dynamite expert who knew explosives better than anyone. The Dincio brothers had pulled a string of heists together, and the alliance was based on trust and a shared love for crime. There were lookouts, drivers, and men who were good at not getting caught. Each one of those people had been carefully handpicked by McNair. This was more than just an average bank job, and had all the hallmarks of something that would go down in the history books. Rumor had it that the United California Bank wasn't just holding millions in cash and gold. There might also be sensitive documents, possibly illegal campaign contributions tied to President Richard Nixon. And this created another layer of risk connected with the heist. But to McNair and his team, the potential reward far outweighed the danger. As midnight approached, the crew made their move. Wearing dark clothing and carrying bags of tools of the trade, they slipped through the shadows, avoiding the few pedestrians who might have been out at that hour. Located in a relatively quiet part of town, with little traffic and few businesses nearby, this bank was perfect for what they had planned. But McNair knew that even in this sleepy town, one mistake could lead to disaster. The first thing they had to do was disable the security system in the bank. McNair had been watching the bank for weeks, so he knew its layout like the back of his hand. He knew where all the alarms and cameras were located, and how long it would take for the police to respond if an alarm was triggered. With that information, the crew worked around the sensors like pros, easily disabling them by cutting wires. By the time it was all done, the bank had been transformed into nothing more than a silent fortress waiting to be breached. Next came the vault, a massive steel structure built to withstand any forced entry. But the Dincio brothers were not going to back down from a challenge. James Dincio had experience with explosives and was able to use that in calculating the amount of dynamite they would need to blow open the vault door, but avoid destroying everything inside. With the charges set, they retreated to a safe distance. When it came, the explosion was both deafening and satisfying. The vault door, once an impenetrable barrier, was now a twisted mass of steel, bent and broken by the sheer force of the blast. The crew discovered stacks of cash, gold bars, and some valuable documents that could be sold for a good price to the right buyer. But even in their victory, McNair and his men were guarded. They knew time was not on their side. The more they lingered, the odds of them being caught was higher. It was in haste and adrenaline that they packed their sacks with all they could: cash, gold, documents, and anything of value. They moved like seasoned professionals who had done this a dozen times before, but they knew this job was different. This was the heist that would retire them all or lock them up for life. When they had enough, the staff removed all traces of anything that showed they had been around. They removed fingerprints, wiped surfaces clean, and disposed of potential leads that could identify their presence to the crime scene. McNair was detail-oriented, as one small mistake could blow their mission out of proportion. After leaving the bank, not a trace of them was visible. Their getaway was just as well carefully planned as the robbery itself. They drove back to their rented condo to divide up the loot and made plans for a return to Ohio. As far as they could tell, the heist had gone off without a hitch, and they had outsmarted everyone, including the FBI. And for a moment, it seemed they were right. Hours passed, and the heist hadn't been reported, with the crew having left long before the bank employees realized that their vault had been breached. The local authorities called the FBI to begin an investigation, but McNair and his crew had been so good that it seemed like the perfect crime that would never be solved. Despite all their careful planning, the crew made several vital mistakes that would prove deadly. Mistakes that were bound to catch up with them very soon. First, there was the critical error of renting that car under false names, which the FBI easily traced. The second mistake was leaving behind some items that seemed harmless on their own, but would end up causing their downfall. These included fingerprints on a roll of duct tape and some of the abandoned tools in the condo that the FBI could collect and match against known criminals. The FBI's investigation got off to a slow start because there was no immediate forensic clues. But over the days, agents began fitting together pieces of the puzzle. They combed the scene of the crime for any evidence the crew might have missed. At first, it seemed the gang had been thorough. However, by expanding their search to include the surrounding area, the FBI did get a surprise location at the car the crew had rented to serve as their base of operations. Inside the car, the agents found traces of the gloves, exactly the ones in the bank, clothing that had been thrown away, and most importantly, the tools used to disable the security cameras of the bank. Checking them across their database brought out Leonard T. McNair, Emil Dincio, and the rest of the gang. Armed with this information, they tracked the crew back to Ohio, where McNair and his associates returned to celebrate the glory of a job done. They were confident that they had pulled off the perfect crime. What they did not know was the FBI was in fact closing in on them. Those arrests came swiftly and without warning, catching the gang flat. Despite their best attempts to keep cool, the evidence was too much to handle. Thereafter, the agents of the FBI recovered enough fingerprints, witness testimonies, and even some of the stolen goods that made up the case against them. Now the trial of Leonard T. McNair and his gang was a media sensation. People were interested in the story behind the Laguna Niguel heist, and the brains behind it who had outwitted the FBI. As details began to surface regarding this crime, it became awfully clear that, in effect, McNair was not as brilliant as everyone thought he was. The prosecutor presented an incriminating case which proved how perfectly the gang had planned and executed the heist, almost to perfection, only to be floored by those small mistakes. The defense did their best to argue the evidence was circumstantial, and that the FBI had made their case off of coincidence rather than hard proof. But the jury wasn't having it. Weeks of testimony and deliberation later, they convicted McNair and his associates on all counts. The sentences were harsh, reflecting the severity of the crime and the audacity with which it had been committed. Leonard T. McNair was given a 20-year jail sentence, a fate also shared by his fellow mates. As the dust settled on one of America's boldest bank heists, Leonard T. McNair and his crew found themselves caught up with thoughts of their fate behind bars. They had danced so skillfully with the law and seemed to outwit the FBI for a moment. In the end, however, it was those very few tiny mistakes that brought the grand scheme crumbling down. Now, years later, one has to wonder, was it worth the effort? Could they have made a different move that would have kept them free? But in a world where the criminals are never tired of pushing the boundaries, Will there be another heist as audacious as the Laguna Niguel job? We'll just have to sit and wait. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.